This is Geometry B, Unit 2, Lesson 2, Properties of Parallelograms. So we are in a unit talking about polygons, and we worked on angle sums earlier for the interior angles of any polygon and exterior angle sums as well. Now we're going to specifically look at some types of quadrilaterals. Quadrilaterals are polygons with 4 sides. So let's examine parallelograms. First, we need to know what a parallelogram is. A parallelogram, double L, elogram. What can be more parallel than two L's side by side? Double L, elogram, parallelogram. It is a quadrilateral, so it's got 4 sides, with 2 sets of parallels. Okay, 2 sets of parallels. So if I draw a parallelogram, I can think of it as 2 parallels, 2 sets of parallels. I can think of them as intersecting, but the parallelogram is right here. Okay, 2 sets of parallels. Boom, 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 boom. Okay. Here we go. Boom. And here. Okay, that's a parallelogram. Okay. And I'm not going to prove all the various things about parallelograms, but there are 5 rules about parallelograms. 5 rules, okay? 5 rules. Okay, parallelograms have parallel sides. That's the definition. Okay, parallel sides. Parallelograms have opposite sides that are congruent. They're the same length. Parallelograms have opposite angles that are congruent. These angles are congruent. These angles are congruent. Parallelograms have diagonals that bisect each other. They split each other in half, or they share a common midpoint. And parallelograms have one side that are both parallel and congruent. Okay, they are both parallel and congruent. Okay, so there's a bunch of different rules or theorems, and that one actually I'm going to bring back later on. Okay, so these are 4 rules about parallelograms. Opposite sides are parallel, opposite sides are congruent, opposite angles are congruent, and opposite or diagonals bisect each other. They cut each other exactly in half. So we can use this to answer questions about parallelograms. For example, let's say this is 48 degrees. Well, if that's 48 degrees, then this is 48 degrees. Okay? What's more is adjacent angles. Adjacent angles, these are called adjacent angles, are not adjacent, sorry. Adjacent angles share a side. These are consecutive angles. Consecutive angles add to 180. They're supplementary. So take 180 minus 48, I get 132. So this angle is 32, and so this angle is 132 degrees. So if I have one angle of a parallelogram, I can find all the other remaining 3 angles as well. So I know all 4 if I know 1. And you may recognize from Geometry A, the unit we did on intersecting lines and transversals, we can prove all of these using corresponding angles, alternate interior angles, same side interior angles, and so on and so forth. Okay? But what's more, we know sides. So let's say we happen to know this side. This side is 14 inches, then this side is 14 inches. If we know this side is 8 inches, then we know this side is 8 inches. Okay? And so on and so forth. And what's more is if we have the diagonals, we know the diagonals split each other in half. So let's say we've got this diagonal. Whoops, that's not accurate. There we go. Then we got this diagonal and this diagonal. This diagonal. Okay, we know those are split in half. So let's say this is 6 inches, then this is also 6 inches. If this is 9 inches, then this is also 9 inches. Okay, because the midpoint of both diagonals are the same. Okay, so those are some of the rules or properties of parallelograms. What's more is the converse is true. We can say if it's a parallelogram, then these 4 things are true. Parallel sides, congruent opposite angles, supplementary, consecutive angles, diagonals bisect each other. We can also say the converse. We can say if one of these is true, then it's a parallelogram. So let me go to a new slide here. So all the converse rules. If you have a quadrilateral with 2 sets of parallel sides, you might be a parallelogram. You remember Jeff Foxworthy. You might be a redneck jokes, right? You might be a parallelogram if you've got 2 sets of parallel sides. That's rule number 1. Rule number 2. Well, if 2 sets of congruent opposite sides, then you're a parallelogram. Rule number 3. If opposite angles are congruent, then it's a parallelogram. Rule number 4. If the diagonals of a quadrilateral bisect each other, split each other in half, have the same common midpoint, then they are that quadrilateral is a parallelogram. And rule number 5, this is an addition. If one pair of sides are congruent and parallel, then you know you've got a parallelogram as well. So we can use all of these rules to prove something is a parallelogram. All right. That's kind of just a brief summary of what you're going to be getting into this unit. There are probably some proofs. Involved. So you want to be able to prove something's a parallelogram. You want to be able to prove lines parallel and all of that stuff. All right. Let me know if you need any help. Feel free to book a live lesson.